I'm Jeremy, and this is Level Up. Level Up is a series about skill trees and how they are used by games and why their inclusion is important. I'm going to be looking at a lot of different games, like Mass Effect Andromeda, Diablo 2, Prey, The Witcher, Path of Exile, a whole bunch of different things. First, we're going to look at what a skill tree is and its different components, and why they're important for this video. So, prior to skill trees, games were more of like a linear affair. Mario runs through the Mushroom Kingdom picking up power-ups, but the player is never really able to change any innate ability about Mario. Talent trees allow players to go back and experience a game in a different way. What is a skill tree? A skill tree is a system that allows players to customize their character's abilities. It's a list of skills that the player can choose from depending on what class they are or the game that it is. Players can choose new abilities, skills, perks, what have you. These typically do cool actions, but also could just be a buff. These skills are used to build the character to fit the player's playstyle, however they want. Characters can be totally different. Let's look at why skill trees are so important. What really makes them important, at least in my view, is their complexity and how they allow player expression. The same game can feel totally different just by using different abilities. Let's look at Dishonored. You can have Corvo the Murderer, who goes through killing everybody in the level, or Corvo the Ninja, who doesn't touch anybody. That's pretty awesome if you're doing that by leveling up and using different skills and abilities. Devs can plan for this by trying to have two different skills that are antithetical to each other, but you don't necessarily have to pick both to succeed in the game. You can pick one and play the game fully that way. That's awesome. If devs didn't have this plan for character progression, most games would just be a straight linear affair like Mario. I see you, Breath of the Wild, over there with your linear ways to upgrade Link, but vast open world that isn't linear. I see you. We're not talking about world linearity, we're talking about skill and character progression linearity. I see you. One of the other things that makes skill trees really important is branching. You can branch from a single node and become so much more. A tree starts from a single node and then builds into this vast network of skills and abilities that do awesome things. One of the other things that's really cool about branching is you can get recombination, where you can skip over some nodes to recombine. What the hell is that? That's crazy. Look at The Witcher 2, where you have different abilities that you can bypass to get to the third ability. That's amazing. That's really important for how the game works. You can really build Geralt to how you want. Some games want every skill to be unlocked. Like Dying Light, by the end of the game, you should be having every skill. The developers plan for this. They plan that you should have every ability and are able to do the same things that everyone else is. But other games, like Path of Exile, where the skill tree is just too big, you can't do that. It's impossible for you to get every skill, and you really have to think and plan out what skills you're going to buy and get, and you're going to have different builds from other people, and that's okay. The developer wants that. The other reason that I would say skill trees are really important to a game is mechanics. They help teach players the mechanics of the game. How do you manage different abilities or actions? Skill trees help the player to think complexly about the game. Well, how do I use this ability to help me in this situation? Can I combine this ability with another ability to do something cool and awesome? The abilities allow players to experiment with the game and try something new and sometimes get wacky results. That's really amazing because you have this functionality in a game where the developer's allowing the player to choose a lot of different things for their character, and that gives the game a lot of variety. Simplified versions of these skill trees can ease the player into the game. They can help the player understand the game and prevent them from being overwhelmed. Tooltips can help players select skills that would be beneficial to them, but sometimes the fun of a skill tree is just making those choices yourself, even if that doesn't work out. I've definitely done that in Path of Exile. Okay, now it is time for quote-unquote the boring part. Skill tree composition, which I think is actually really important because knowing the skill tree and how it is defined and made really gives you a better understanding of why it's so important and how it's so useful. A skill tree is made up of nodes. Nodes are the individual abilities on a tree that sometimes can be leveled up to greater power or can just be a singular 1-point upgrade, and that's it. The second part of the skill tree is the branches, which are the ways to get to different parts of a tree. This can make one tree feel very vast and complex, like, you guessed it, an actual tree. All right, one of the other things that's really a big part of skill tree is gates. Gates are locking mechanisms that are used by developers that prevent the players from having full access to the tree at once. Gates help adjust the power curve and difficulty of the game. They lock other nodes. They help players slow down by restricting the further up trees that have different mechanics so they can learn about early game mechanics. Without gates, there really wouldn't be any progression dynamics, and the tree kind of loses everything about it. If there weren't any gates and you were able to just pick every ability, well, then it's just like a pool. You can pick from that pool and pick whatever ability you want, but the gating really helps define the tree. Same with the branching and the nodes. How do you get to different nodes? Well, typically you do that through leveling up or buying skills, which are nodes. So players level through doing different things in the game. It depends on the game. In RPGs, you typically get experience for killing things or completing quests or making discoveries. This experience is culminated and tracked by the game. Once upon leveling, you typically get points that can be put into skills, abilities, or perks. These abilities, which are nodes, can either be a singular upgrade or can be upgraded with 2Ds for a double dosage of pimpage multiple times. They can either give new additional bonuses or just modify the previous values to new, upgraded, more powerful values. Each game is different. Certain games, when you level, you only get one skill point. See Borderlands 2. But in like Mass Effect Andromeda, you get 6 points per level. The reason this is because it's dependent on the developer and how they want the players to play the tree and how the power curve is going to end up working out with, well, we should have all of these abilities, we shouldn't have all of these abilities. There's a lot of game development and design that goes into skill trees. Some games, like Prey, you don't even level. There is no experience in the game. You just buy new skills with neuromods, which can be found or crafted. I think that's pretty awesome. I keep talking about abilities, skills, or perks. Well, here's what they do in-game. There's really two types of skill. You have an active skill and a passive skill. Active skills are things that the player has to activate to do. Let's take Mass Effect Andromeda, where you have Flamethrower, you have Charge, you have Tactical Cloak. Typically, this is what players think of when they think of abilities or perks or skills. These skills usually add new gameplay mechanics to the game. You are able to do a new action or what have you. On the other side, you have passive skills, which can also be referred to as innate skills. Innate skills function without the player activating them. So things like improved health regen or quicker shield coming back or just additions to active abilities that make them better. It's important to plan out your passive abilities so you get the kind of playstyle you want. It's very important to do that with active abilities too, but if you're playing games like Path of Exile on hardcore, you really need to think about your skills and abilities, because if you don't have the right skills, you could just die, and that's terrible for hardcore mode. I've died before, and I still can't get over it. Passive abilities typically modify gameplay mechanics instead of adding new ones. When people think of skill trees, they also typically think of builds and classes. Now, a character class is an aggregate of several abilities and aptitudes, while typically providing detailed information about the background and other such information about the class. You have things like the rogue or the fighter or the wizard. You don't really see characters outside their role, but you have things like muscle wizard. You should look it up, it's amazing. But just by having specific classes, games can help define characters and their roles. So just having the ranger, well, you know that this character is built for typically archery, maybe a little bit of tracking, animal wilderness stuff. The class helps the player understand what role they're supposed to fill. Classes can also help with playstyle and can help give variety to the game. But when you combine that with a complex skill tree, now you're cooking with gas. We've talked about character class, now let's talk about builds. Builds are just a specific way to craft a character. Some abilities might be better than others, and if you don't get those abilities, it can really hamper how you play the game. Builds are usually found in RPGs and games like that, where it's really important to have a defined skill list and build. You usually find expansive builds in the community for the game. Like Path of Exile has forums and forums about this. It's pretty awesome. The last thing I want to talk about is presentation of skill trees. Skill trees have been around for a long time, since before Diablo 2, but Diablo 2 is really the one that kind of made it popular and is considered the father of skill trees, which is why we're eventually going to look at Diablo 2. Trees don't always look the same. They can vary a lot. Let's look at like Borderlands 2 versus Path of Exile, or Prey versus The Witcher. Like, all these trees really differ greatly from each other. This presentation can affect how players view the game. Like, you can either have a really complex skill tree like Path of Exile, or a really simple one like Borderlands 2. Bigger trees allow developers to do different things. That doesn't mean a bigger tree is always better. Like, sometimes a smaller, more succinct tree is actually more beneficial for the game. If Borderlands 2 had a skill tree like Path of Exile, I think it would be very off-putting for a lot of players. And same thing, you don't necessarily get the same amount of complexity. It depends on what the developer wants from the game. With Path of Exile, it is very, very helpful that they have such a big tree. The last thing about presentation is, man, these trees just look nice, don't they? They just look fun. Like, you have like Final Fantasy X with its complex spherical grid, which is really cool. Or you have Path of Exile with its many branching paths, or Salt and Sanctuary. You have a lot of different trees that are all unique and important. All right, quick recap. Skill trees are important because of their mechanics and their complexity, along with player expression. A tree is composed of nodes, branches, gates. There are things as active skills and passive skills. Builds and classes are really important for skill trees because they help the tree gain complexity. Finally, we have skill tree presentation. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to be making more of these in the future. I'm going to be really getting into specific games and how their skill tree is unique and why it is important to skill trees in general, and how they've kind of affected the scope and realm of skill trees. Next time, we're going to be looking at all of the different Mass Effect games and the different skill trees that they have. This has been Jeremy with Level Up. Thanks for watching, and see you later.